Mobile hunters, the king of comfort has arrived. Go to tetherednation.com and check out the new Lockdown saddle. Over the past 2 years, Tethered has tested and refined a new approach to their saddle lineup. The Lockdown saddle takes the best-in-class features from the Phantom, like the UtiliBridge, comfort channels, and included an expandable saddle body with their Lockdown link construction to take saddle hunting to the next level of comfort. As if this wasn't enough, they developed Lockdown haulers, which has a slightly rigid internal frame structure, so you can easily unzip, zip, and access haulers with one hand. And if you're a guy like me with no junk in your trunk and have issues with your saddle staying put while you're walking in to hunt, the Lockdown modular yoke solves this problem. Whether you're new to saddle hunting or an old tree climbing veteran, go to tetherednation.com for all your saddle hunting gear. All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. And today I have a fellow on that I've been following for a little while. I actually learned of you from my buddies from Exodus because you did a Whitetail Cribs episode with those guys. Those guys are some of my best friends. Had a chance to watch that, and then just been kind of following along with what you've had going on, watching you lay down awesome deer. You had a killer year this year. You did an out-of-state hunt this year. And I was like, man, I got to have this guy on. And selfishly, you're from Oklahoma. Oklahoma's on a short list of places I want to get to in the not so distant future. Yeah. So I was like, you know what? It's right. Right. Keep that a secret. So I was like, you know what? I need to have this fella on and pick his brain. And I'm talking to none other than Mr. Tyrell Roy. What's going on, man?
Not much. How are you doing?
I'm good, man. Merry Christmas to you and Happy New Year, dude.
Yeah. Merry Christmas to you. Looking forward to this next year. Yeah,
that's right, man. It's crazy how fast we kind of turn the page, right? It's like one season kind of ends, and it's, you're probably the same as me. You had a few more tags than I did, but, I filled my tags all by I think my last tag was filled November 7th, and so I've just been kind of twiddling my thumbs since then, and I'm already chomping at the bit to get out the scout. Even during I got a couple doe tags, and I'm like, well, maybe I'll carry my bow, but I was like, I really just want to go out and start scouting and kind of start laying plans for next year.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. How was go ahead.
I know exactly how that is, filling that last tag early, and then it's just, man, it's rough.
Yeah, I know. I right after that, I sent a buddy of mine a text, and I was like, hey, man, only 265 days till the season. Yep. He was like, boy, he's like, you better slow down. You're gonna have a painful couple months. He's like, if you're already there, Yeah. But how were the holidays, man? How was Christmas for you? Everything all good on your end?
Yeah, it was good. Yeah, nice and pretty simple, straightforward. Yeah. Got it all pretty much knocked out, and on Christmas Day we got one more family deal to go to Friday, and we'll be done.
Nice. Yeah, Santa Claus come to visit?
Yeah. So I've got two girls, little girls. My oldest just turned 4 on the 18th, and then the youngest is 10 months. And man, they're spoiled rotten.
Yeah, that's right. So Santa Claus in full effect in the Roy household.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Mine's 15. So the magic the shine has wore off at this point. You know what I mean? To a degree from that standpoint. But I just got back from doing all of our traveling. My parents always come. Well, one set of my parents usually come in and visit the weekend before. So they were here Saturday, Sunday, leading up to Christmas. And then we have Christmas, just our family, like us three, like me, my daughter, and my wife. And then we jump in the car and we head back and visit like her parents and then my dad and my stepmom. And we try to just do it all in 2 days and cram everybody in, and get it all done and then get back home. That way I can do a little R&R before, the madness of the new year kind of kicks off, and I try to sneak out and do a little hunting, a little scouting too in the meantime, if I can, you know what I mean? Yeah. But, so man, before we, we're going to jump in and we're going to talk about all your hunts and stuff from this year. But before we do that, I just like to give everyone kind of like a background, like a Tyrell Roy 101, like where you're from, what you do for a living. So everyone just kind of has a sense of like, a little perspective on who you are.
Yeah. So obviously my name's Tyrell Roy. I grew up in central, just a little bit east of central Oklahoma. And my dad was a general contractor, owned his own business. I grew up very, I would say sheltered. Like we didn't have TV. We didn't no, I mean, it was pretty crazy. And
Right.
my dad worked. I worked from a very young age. I was with my dad working a lot. I was homeschooled, so I had lots of freedom to get out in the woods. And, from the time I could 6, 7, 8 years old, had BB gun in my hand, just roaming the woods. We lived on 80 acres. I had access to another 80 and 160 that my grandpa owned, and yeah, every spare moment I was just in the woods,
Right.
fishing, trying to shoot birds with my BB gun and stuff like that. So when I was probably 17, 18, my parents kind of hunted a little bit, but not anything crazy, just a few days during rifle season.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved to go. So as I got older, I went, with them, and I just loved it. So when I was 17, 18, somewhere in there, I got a used bow and started bow hunting. And where I learned to bow hunt was in Central Oklahoma, with no YouTube videos, no hunting videos, just a bow and me and the trees and it, in the woods, and it was wild. And then I grew up there and worked with my dad for a while. I was an electrician for years and years. Went to school to be an electrician. Did that for years. And then in 2015, I moved to Northwest Oklahoma. So I met my wife in 2014. We started dating in 2015. I moved up to Northwest Oklahoma, and her parents own and operate a eighth generation farm and a wheat farm. So I currently work with my father-in-law on the farm, and we just grow wheat basically and run cows. So that's what I do currently, and the hunting up here is just night and day difference from where I grew up, to up
Right.
here.
How's it? So I'm a complete novice when it comes to Oklahoma and understanding Oklahoma kind of terrain and how it might be different from one area to another. Like I have two buddies that are from Oklahoma that I talk to a little bit. One is
Yes.
Eddie Claypool, awesome hunter, old school dude, just such a good guy, salt of the earth. And he turned me on to another fella named Travis Keith, who's also from Oklahoma. And just is a killer and one of the nicest human beings you'll ever meet. But my knowledge of Oklahoma just in general is pretty low, so just, I guess, describe to me just a little bit about where you grew up, the type of like habitat, terrain, and how it's different from where you live now.
Yeah. Yeah. So Oklahoma is obviously very diverse in habitat. And where I grew up is, I would say, kind of on that transition line between eastern Oklahoma, where you have, small, we call them mountains, but there's small mountains, big hills, and heavily wooded. And then like western Oklahoma is pretty open. I would say kind of like what you would picture Kansas, with tree rows and creek bottom, river bottoms have cover and lots of ag. And I grew up kind of in that transition zone where it wasn't real hilly, but it was a lot of hardwoods, mainly like scrub oak, like blackjack, and there was some white oaks and stuff like that in there, red oaks, and then like just brush, cedars and stuff. There was very little ag where I grew up and very little open area. It was pretty much all just scrubby brush. And
Right.
the trees aren't tall, but they're big enough to get in a tree, but they're not big, great big open hardwoods. It's just high stem count underbrush, and that's where I grew up hunting. So if there was an ag field around, lots of deer would congregate on it, especially late in the season. But then obviously you had the oaks to contend with, and man, I knew nothing about, when I first started bow hunting, I knew nothing about wind, thermals, feed trees, food, nothing. I knew nothing. And we would just, in rifle season, there was quite a few deer there, and my parents rifle hunted. So we would just go sit, under a tree by a pond or somewhere, and wait for some deer to come out and shoot at them, right? That's how I grew up hunting. And then when I was 11, like I said earlier, I grew up with a Daisy Red Ryder until I was big enough to get like an actual pump up BB gun. And that Red Ryder was a lever action, just like a Winchester 30-30. And on that Daisy, I would just look, both eyes open, look down the barrel, and shoot. And if I missed, I could see the BB and I could adjust, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when I was 11, my dad's like, here's my 30-30, you can go hunt. So I was just walking around in the woods at 11 with the open sight 30-30, and dude, I was fast with that gun. But I couldn't hit anything. I was just both eyes open, just bam, 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 and I wasn't killing anything. So that's how it started. My hunting started.
Mm-hmm.
Then finally I shot a doe or button buck, and then I did that for a few years, just rifle hunting, and then I bought myself a rifle and did that for a few years, and then the bow hunting. When I think I was 17, a buddy of mine had moved back he lived in Virginia, and he moved back to Oklahoma, and he had a climber. Of course, climbers don't work around there because they're just brushy trees. So I had one tree that I had cleaned all the limbs off, and he let me borrow his climber, so I would just leave it at the base of the tree, and I would walk down there, and it was where all these heads of ditches came together, and there was trails that would run off these points down and across the ditch, and it was like a spider web of trails, so it was a major crossing. And looking back, I mean, it was a perfect hub, I just didn't know how to hunt it, so I got in a tree on the bottom side of that, and got up in the climber as high as I could, which was eye level with the point. So these deer would come off the point. They'd be eye level with me looking right at me, And it was rough when I was learning to bow hunt. And of course, like I said, no one to teach me. My dad didn't bow hunt. I just had no one to learn from.
Right.
So I shot, I think that first year I shot 2 deer right in the shoulder and never found those deer. And then that just fueled my fire to get out and be successful. So I spent just so much time hunting. And then one morning it was raining in October, and I was driving. We had a really long driveway. I was driving down the driveway. We had like a little 5-acre field, and there were some deer crossing the field, and I knew how they always went to the woods. They would angle over, hit this fence line, and then go straight into the woods. So I ran to the house, got my bow, and cut them off, and shot my first deer. It was a doe that way.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how it started. And within I think I was 18 when that happened, and then when I moved to Northwest Oklahoma, I was 24, 25. So in that space, I shot 2 bucks and probably 5 or 6 does.
Mm-hmm.
In just in that that early trajectory of my bow hunting journey, And I was my biggest asset in that time of my bow hunting was I wasn't afraid to fail, and I wasn't afraid to put sets, anywhere. I would climb in any tree and just move, constantly moving, new spot, until I saw deer, and then I would, hunt that spot until I wouldn't see any more deer or whatever. And so that's where I learned about wind. That's where I learned about feed trees. That I shot my first buck with a bow on a feed tree, and so that's where I really cut my teeth and started. Then I shot like a 2-year-old. That was my first deer, and then after that, 2 years after that, I shot a really old, mature buck that I'd hunted for a couple years, and finally caught up with him in the rut. And so that was like the culmination of it, and then that was like the launching pad to moving up to Northwest Oklahoma. Then up here, it's like we have a river that I've got a lot of permission ground right on the river. So you have river, really thick cover, and then cattle pasture leading out to ag usually. So these deer are in a constant cover to ag generally pattern, So that's what I'm dealing with now.
Nice. Is that, I guess, that cover to pasture to ag, is that more open country than it was where you grew up?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And so,
where I grew up, there was some fields, there would be some ag or some cattle pasture here and there. But up here, it's like there's a tree here and there, or there's, it's wide open, and there's like plum thickets, and along the river there's what we call salt cedars or tamaracks. They're it's really thick and nasty. Deer don't even like to go in them. And then lots of cedar thickets, and there's no oak trees.
Right.
There's some walnuts, no pecans. It's very open.
Right. So do you hunt a lot from the ground, like in that area, or are you still finding trees to get into?
Yeah, I'm definitely not afraid to hunt from the ground if I have to. Because, I've shot several deer from the ground, but I also am very mobile. I've got the full saddle set up and sticks and multiple different sticks. And so I'm not afraid to get in a tree, even if it's a few feet off the ground.
Right. Yeah. That's one of the big kind of curveballs for me was in coming out there, or out just to like the plain states to hunt, the past couple of years was adding the ground game and being proficient at it. Right. Cause I screwed so much stuff up being on the ground, 2 years prior that, I had great opportunities on really good deer that I would either get busted drawing, or I would get winded, or I would get, seen moving, trying to get into position to get drawn, or whatever the case was. And kind of what you were saying, where it's like, to me, that was always the benefit of hunting from a saddle, was that it could always be with me. And if I needed to get into a tree, even if it was just 2 or 3 feet off the ground so I could see over something or whatever, I always had that option. If I found a tree that I could do it. Just where I had been the past 2 years, there really weren't. It was all locust trees or all thorny, so I couldn't really get into anything. Yeah. But I did have a couple setups the first year I was out there where I could get into a tree, if for nothing else, to kind of get a visual in some places where I couldn't see necessarily,
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think a big thing for me was when I was able to mentally let go of, I had to get in the perfect tree. You watch hunting videos. Oh, they're in these beautiful trees or whatever. And as soon as I could let go of that, having that mentality of I have to be in a tree can really hinder you. Because now, if I can set up on the ground, now it's no matter what wind, I can hunt that deer. So that really helped me. That was a big deal when I let that go.
Yeah, that's such a good point, because when you don't tie yourself to a method, it really opens up the opportunities and possibilities. And so, like, even I think it's just a really interesting point, because I think you probably had that same mentality. Maybe it became really apparent with not necessarily needing to be in a tree, where you let that go and said, hey, I don't need to be in a tree to try to kill this deer. I can hunt wherever I need to hunt in order to try to make it happen. But were there parts of your hunting kind of journey, if you will, where you learned to kind of let some stuff go and kind of, because I'll be honest with you, for me, for this year, it was I've always relied on historical data. And then this year I didn't check a single trail camera, and I hunted the whole season on just what I knew historically from understanding places for like the past 3 years, and didn't look at any pictures, didn't like pull trail camera cards, like anything like that. And it was super freeing, and it let me just kind of let go of intel that would change my mind about things that I already knew. Yeah. You know what I mean? Do you feel the same way, or?
Yeah, now today I feel that way, where that took a longer transition to get to that point where, technology it's definitely a blessing, but it can really be a curse with hunting, because it ties you mentally, it ties you to something. And as soon as, I hunt private land almost exclusively here in Oklahoma, and most people that hunt private land, they're tied to a food plot or whatever it is, a feeder or a terrain feature. They're tied to it. So especially people that live in the city, they come out to their lease, they're relying on their trail camera. Then they're going to hunt where their trail camera is. But what the opposite of what your trail camera is telling you is, so if a deer is in front of your trail camera, well, there's a high percentage of time he's not in front of your trail camera, and it's not where your trail camera is. So you got to figure out where that is, and that's how I like to hunt.
Yeah, that's a good point, man. Because that was kind of what happened to me this year, and it was actually by accident. And what I would like to take the credit and say I was smart enough to realize that, and that it was by design. But the reality of it was that I was kind of forced into it because I had some stuff come up in the spring and I didn't get to scout nearly as much as I wanted to. And, and just didn't have the time to get out in the spring or the summer. And the fall came around and I was like, well, I've run trail cameras in these places for the past 3 years, and that spot in Kansas I hunted for the 2 years prior. I was like, I'm just going to basically hunt this whole year off of what I know to be true, what I've seen, the scouting that I've done previously, and the trail camera inventory that I've had previously, and just going to let that be my guide. And you have to, what you were saying earlier, that it takes a long time to get there. It's because you have to learn to trust yourself. Like you have to learn to trust that you put in the time and you know what's correct and what's going on, and trust your gut. And that's, to me, is like one of the hardest things for a hunter to do until they do two things. One is like they've had enough time in country or in the woods, right? To like just to get a feeling about a spot and be like, man, I don't see all the sign that I want to see, but this spot feels right. That intuition. Yeah. And then the other part is to not care what other people think about you. You got to get to that place. And once you get there, you know what I mean? Then then you're good. Then you kind of shed all the stuff, and then you're super free to kind of hunt to hunt good hunts. You're free. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah. But
historical data is. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. I was going to transition into something, but I want to hear what you're going to say there.
Historical data is the same as a trail camera. It can be a curse, and it can be your best friend. Here where I am, the historical data is you have to find what rotation it's on, because it's not an every year thing. It's driven by food, and I'm sure in your neck of the woods it's the same as far as it's food driven. But here it's what is in that field this year. Is it soybeans? Is it milo? Is it wheat? Or and if it's not one of those, is that going to be a summer time like data, or is that going to be a late season, fall, whatever? It just depends on what that is, and that might be a 2 or 3 year rotation, right? So you can't just go every year banking on the same thing.
Yeah.
Sure, it's the same where you from.
It is in a lot of ways, because there was some places where in years past, it's like I had really good inventory and I kind of knew what was going on, and I went to kind of hunt this particular spot on historical data, and it was just kind of a ghost town. And what ended up happening was that all the acorn drop that I had the year before kind of completely dried up, and it just didn't drop in that area, and I just didn't have acorns really anywhere. And that wasn't this year; that was the year prior. And it just kind of had to change on the fly, like how I was hunting, basically, because everything I kind of knew about some of these spots was completely different. Now, there's a big woods piece that I hunt that this food is so scarce that like it typically, I haven't seen, like it's pretty consistent year over year because it's a huge homogeneous tract of land. There's no agriculture like around, so there's no like destination food source that's going to drive them somewhere. And so they're living a lot off of browse. There's not even a lot of like white oaks or red oaks in a lot of these areas. There's a lot of summertime food, like wild blueberries and things like that, but they're living by and large off of just browse, for the most part.
Okay.
And so in those areas, like I find it to be a lot more consistent, and it becomes more terrain based and more like doe bedding based almost. Like I can almost like time it like to dates more so than I can time it to like to like terrain, like the movement. Like I can look at specific like sets of dates and be like, oh man, these 3 dates in this area are always really good. And it's almost more so around like when scrapes heat up in specific areas and stuff like that is what I kind of see a lot of. But so I wanted to jump into your October hunt, man. I just kind of want to go through like each kind of session here, man, and see like what's, how everything kind of played out, dude, because you killed a bunch of really good bucks this year. And I want to get to the Kansas hunt because I knew you traveled out of state for that. And I want to spend some time on that. But selfishly, I want to learn a little bit about Oklahoma, because it's a place that I've kind of like had circled. I had a buddy that was out there this year. I'd love to get out there at some point and do some hunting. I just want to, kind of learn a little bit about it. So you killed a deer early season this year, right? So when's your season open in Oklahoma?
October 1st.
October 1st. So so the deer you killed in October, did you have history with this deer? Did you know of this deer, or how did this kind of hunt play out?
So I'm pretty sure that I had this deer on my camera 2 years prior, but he had been missing when he showed up this year.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't recognize him. But looking back, I think I had him on 2 years ago.
Right. What was it about him that thought you knew this deer? What was there a particular characteristic about him or was it just like him showing up at a spot like at a certain time, or?
No, it's just the way he's real unique, racked. I mean, he's got
Mm-hmm.
really long beans, but he's not very wide.
Mm-hmm. And was he like where you found him? Like, how did you end up locating this deer? Either like years prior, like where did you pick him up at, and then where did you pick him up at this year?
So on this piece of property I have, it's a permission farm, and it's mainly cattle pasture that the landowner has cows in there, usually year round. But he runs a fence, and it's on a bend of the river. The river is running from the north going south, and it turns and goes east on this property. So one whole boundary, two sides of it is river, the other two sides just fence. And between the river and the cattle pasture is just really thick brush. You have big cottonwood trees, cedar thickets, and salt cedars and stuff. And then the farmer has run a fence along there to keep his cows from getting down into the river. So there's probably this strip that's maybe in some places it's 10 yards wide between the river and the fence, and some places it's 100 yards wide that just makes this arc along the river. So then on the opposite side of the river, on the south side of the river, we have another cattle pasture that's like about a quarter mile across, and then you have ag fields. And early season, these deer will stay like on my side of the river. They'll cross the river and go out to the ag fields at night. So if I have any scrapes along that side of the river, put some cameras over scrapes there, and I will get, I mean, 90% of the bucks that are
Hmm.
in that area at some point, during September and early October. That's
Right.
usually on that property. That's usually my strategy. Now, that only works for early season. So that, like, the curve of that river is like the hub of a wheel, and I mean it's phenomenal piece of property. And out from that hub are these different directions that they can go, mostly to the northwest, west, southwest, south,
Hmm.
where there's just ag. It's wheat fields, soybeans, corn. It's a wide variety of ag, and it just works as a hub. Now, early season, they're in the center, bedding, going out to the destination ag. In the rut, it's the opposite. They come mostly onto my farm into the cattle pasture, the brushy cattle pasture. At least the bucks are. They're trying to lock their does down in that area. And then late season, it's back to the spokes going out to food.
So if you're using that food kind of as like a somewhat of like helping to understand the direction that they might travel, especially during early season, like, because I know around here, and this is just me not knowing a whole lot about Oklahoma. My season will open mid September, and usually by that point, in some of the areas where I do, like this year, I was fortunate. There's one piece of public where there were beans that were close to it. And when I say close to it, it's not adjacent to it. It's just close enough that deer that are bedding on that public will make the voyage to that bean field. And so and so whenever it's beans, like in the early season, that early opener, I know that's probably in play. But it's, I might have a week, maybe 2 weeks, because usually by the time, unless I get like a low lying area that's going to hold a little extra moisture, those beans turn usually around that time. I might get that third week of September to hunt it, and then after that they're starting to yellow and they're just not as, obviously not as desirable. And I'm just curious out there for you, like, is it about the same, like, or do you still get some run out of those beans, into the beginning of October?
Yeah, we'll get some run out of them. So typically the main crop around here is wheat. So guys will plant wheat in October, September, October. Their wheat, it grows a little bit, lays dormant through the winter, and then it comes on in the spring. They harvest it in June. Now, some farmers after that harvest date will plant soybeans. Somewhere in June, maybe early July. Now, those beans will be green into October, but the beans that are planted in April will be dying out by the end of September.
Yeah. Nice, man. How often do you have those those late beans in that area? That's got to be like a freaking gold mine. And when you get that, right?
Yeah. Well, it's yes and no, because it's a quarter mile in the narrowest spot. Some spots it's 3/4 of a mile from the bedding on me to the beans. And these deer will, so they're not, as soon as it's their first instinct is to get up out of their bed, they're kind of staging a little bit, but then they're crossing the river and they're gone. So it's really hard for me to hunt cold fronts because of the north wind is blowing, into the river. It's hard for me to access, and then I just have there's 50 yards where they're from their bed to the river that I have to hunt them. Then the most of the time that they're daylighting, they're on the neighbors, headed to the bean field, or they're in the bean field. So they're betting on me, but it's just they're not spending a lot of time on me other than betting. Right. Until you get to that mid-October, late October time frame.
Right. So with this deer, did you notice him in September? Did you get him like before the season on camera, like where you knew that he was around?
No. So I had one deer. The second deer that I shot this year, we've been passing that deer for a few years now. And I had in Oklahoma we get 2 buck tags, and I had one tag that was for him. Like it was that deer, nothing for one of my tags. Right. The other tag was for this non-typical deer that I had, real close to where I killed that other deer. And October 4th, I slipped in there, and I had a really beautiful food plot down there. This is a couple miles away, and I shot that non-typical, and I shot. Just barely skinned him underneath. I mean, perfect left and right, just right underneath. Just barely laid him open. And so I was pretty upset about that. And then, so to go back to your question, the deer that I did shoot October 7th, I had no pictures of him until the day I shot him. And so I didn't know he was there until, I have a cell cam down there. He showed up that morning, and I went in that evening and killed him. So I missed that, I hit that, wounded that non-typical, and he showed back up a day before that. But I just, for some reason, I could not go back and hunt that deer. There was something in my mental that I was just because I knew he wasn't hurt at all. That I couldn't. I looked and looked for him. There was a little bit of blood, whatever. I looked and looked for that deer, and finally decided he was alive. And 3 days later, he showed back up, and then he was on my food plot, scrapes, just. Nothing happened. Is that deer still alive? Did he make it through the season so far? No, he was killed. The neighbors killed him. Neighbors killed him. Damn. Yep. That's a rough one there, right? Yeah, it is. Yeah. Dang, not man. The first time that's happened. Right. Yeah. That's neighbors. Yeah. Right. They pick up your scraps, I guess. Right. Yeah. But dang, man. So I forget. I think we said it was somewhere around October 7th. You go in to hunt this deer. What was that setup? So oddly enough, that deer showed up in the morning. My dad was in town. He lives in Colorado. He was in town. He shoots a recurve, and he wanted to go shoot a deer. And so I had this spot, had a lone wolf on the tree, and took my saddle, and we both got in the tree over this. So you have you have the river. And right along the river, it's really thick, and these deer they'll parallel the river from their bedding, and then there's certain places where they'll cross the river. And in between these crossings, or at these crossings, you're still 40, 50 yards off the river. You'll have these big, community scrapes. Mm-hmm. And so we're hunting a scrape area where they're traveling parallel to the river, and just beyond where we were, they're turning and they're going across to the river. Mm-hmm. So we were hunting what I call a bully buck, which is 6-7-year-old buck that's 130 inches, and they tend to be more aggressive and run out younger deer that I don't want run off. So we were hunting this deer. This deer shows up. My dad shoots at it and he misses it, and it runs off. So we were just maybe a doe will show up or something. And this deer ended up showing up, which was totally unexpected, and the deer was I think because he wasn't used to the area, he was so on edge. He was just, it was really calm, so that doesn't help. But the wind was more out of the west, which was perfect for what we needed. But he came in, and so I think scrapes are a visual attraction to deer. Mm-hmm. As soon as the buck clears the brush and he can see the scrape, he's looking at the scrape. He wants to see it. This has been my experience. So as soon as where we're hunting is really thick. As soon as I could see him, I had a little window where I could see him. He's like looking at the scrape, but he doesn't. I don't, for whatever reason, he didn't like it. You know how he's lifting his nose up, smelling,
Mm-hmm.
but he was coming closer and closer. But when he got to it, he did what old bucks do. He looped around through the thick, nasty brush and popped out on the other side of it, on the downwind side of it. And once he got downwind of it, he was still smelling, but he liked what he could smell, I guess, and he came into it. But as soon as he got within my shooting lane, I let him have it.
You let him have it. Man, that's interesting that you mentioned the visual aspect of it, because most people just think about the scrape being like the scent aspect of it. And I don't know if you've ever followed anything from Troy Pottinger or not. I've had him on the show a couple times. Buddy of mine, he's hunts in Idaho. All the mountains out there. Yeah. And he's got like a scrape method that he uses, and it's actually something I adopted and use here. And his is a lot based on making mock scrapes or trying to create community scrapes, but really kind of focused on that visual element, like to the point to where making sure that like looking at scrapes in the area and then mimicking what they look like, from like the size, like to how like they're shaped, using the same tree that they're making a licking branch on, like, everything, like trying to make it look exactly like other ones look, because he said is exactly what you said. Like the first thing that deer kind of notices about a scrape is the visual element of it. Does it look like something that I should use? Right.
Yeah.
Which is kind of interesting that you pick that up.
I think too that a buck is, as he's coming into an area, I have got to where I'll hunt downwind a ways of my food plots, even my and scrapes too, because a buck he'll loop downwind of a food plot, especially late October, early November, and into the rut. If he doesn't have if he's looking for a doe, he'll loop downwind and smell it. Now, if he can see that scrape or that food plot, he's looking for a deer, right? And this deer was new to the area. I had him on that scrape at like 9 o'clock that morning, so I figured he was bedded pretty close. But as he's coming in, he wants to see, is there maybe there's a dominant buck that I need to watch out for? Maybe there's whatever. I'm looking for a deer. And two, is the scrape there? Like, whatever it is holds their attention so well.
Right.
Which allows me to draw, get away with a little movement and shoot, especially on that really calm scenario.
Right. Yeah. Do you ever use decoys in and around there?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I have I don't know if you're familiar with the stalker decoy.
No, I've never seen those.
That it mounts, it's like, it's flat, it mounts to the front of your bow.
Okay, yeah, I've seen those, yeah, for sure. Nice.
Yeah, I have one of those, and I've never used like a life-size 3D decoy, but it's definitely on my bucket list.
Yeah, I decoyed for the first time this year, and I just used like a heads-up decoy.
Kansas?
Yeah, in Kansas.
Yeah.
And I decoyed one small buck with it, and I had him baffled. Like he had no clue what was happening. Like I had him at 5 yards, and he's like staring at the decoy, and I'm moving, like, because I was really just trying to see how much movement I could get away with. Because Travis Glassman is the guy who turned me on to it, and I use the decoy the exact same way he uses the decoy, and I've talked to him about it, and he gave me some pointers and stuff, and he was just telling me, he's like, you'll be surprised how much movement you can get away with, because it's literally just a heads up decoy on a like an old not an old, but like a plastic electric fence post that has like a spike in it, like a step in post, you know what I mean? And so I basically cut that off at a length and like attached the adapter to that so I could put the head on it, and so that way I can carry it, it's really light, and I can just step it into the ground and can turn it and get behind it and stuff like that. And he was like, what he said was, and I've watched his videos, and he gets away with so much movement at such a close range. I was like, that's crazy. It's like, I can't believe he's getting away with moving that much with that thing. And so I talked to him a little bit. Well, I had him on the show, and then I talked to him a couple times before I left for Kansas, and I just said, I can't believe how much you're getting away with. He's like, Clint, he's like, you get a buck that sees that decoy, he's like, it does something to them. He's like, they're oblivious to everything else that's around it. He was like, it's almost like, almost like they're expecting to see movement around that deer, like the body moving, like, so it almost feels natural to them. They don't recognize that it's not the deer moving. They just see movement, and they expect that deer to be moving, And so, and so I had this small buck come in, and I was looking and there weren't any other deer around. So I was like, I'm not going to blow anything else out. And I didn't want him to spend a whole lot of time around me because I didn't want him blowing my game, So I was like, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and decoy him. And so I popped it up when he was about 60 yards away, and he didn't see it. And he didn't see it until he got to about 15 yards, and he saw it, and he was like, whoa. And then he walked in, was smelling all around, and he got to like 5 yards, and I was purposefully like moving the decoy and moving around it, like just like behind it, to see how much movement I could get away with. Yeah. He finally did booger and just jumped, but he only went he took one big jump and was at like 10 yards and then just stood there. And I was like, I grabbed my bow and I like held it. I didn't draw at him or anything like that, but I just held it and moved it like I would draw. And like, dude just stood there, like, you know what I mean? Like, it was, I was blown away with how much I actually got away with. And he probably spent like 5 minutes just like trying to figure out what I was.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing what you can get away with. Last year I had my 3-year-old daughter, and she's like walking around with this decoy, holding it, and we were decoying bucks. They're coming into bow range, and she loves it.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. So you killed that deer, and now did Kansas happen first, or did the next Oklahoma deer happen first?
Yeah, so the next Oklahoma deer happened after that.
Okay. Yeah, so talk to me about that one. How was that one different? This was a November buck, right?
Yeah, November 2nd. So that deer historically on this farm, which is probably like 10 miles from where I killed the early season buck, it's the same situation, but it's a little bit tighter. The river, it's cover on the river, wheat field, and then across the road to the south is like 300 acres of soybeans and tons of deer. Go from the river to the soybeans every evening. I go out there, watch all the bucks, and so usually I have a couple cameras somewhere close to the river, somewhere close to the bean field, and there's a little water hole right by the bean field. I get lots of pictures on there. 2 years ago, I started getting pictures of this deer that I shot on that water hole, and so the year after that, my brother passed him. We decided we're going to pass him as a 4-year-old, probably like 160-ish deer. He had him on the ground with his recurve in the rut, and videoed him with his phone instead of shooting him. Thank goodness he passed him. And so we had some history with that deer, and so this summer 2023, like June, I put my cameras out in June. There's a scrape down in the river bottom that's like a hub scrape that I'll go freshen, and actually on this one I did it in like March, and start getting deer on the scrape down there, and they'll just mainly they work the licking branch, and so I was starting getting deers, and I could start to see this big deer. Sure enough, it was him. And like June, July, end of July, he just disappeared. And the neighbors that have the bean field, I think what happened was this year they only planted like 5 acres of beans, and for whatever reason, I'm not sure why, but I think he just didn't feel comfortable in that small of an area with the amount of deer that were going out there. Is the only thing I can guess. But he disappeared, and I have no idea where he went. So, but I had one tag that's like, no matter what, to the last day of season, it's for that deer. So all of October, I never had that deer on camera, or September. The end of October, the weekend right before Halloween, my in-laws wanted the family to go to Branson. So my wife and I, her 2 sisters, their families, we all went to Branson. And keep in mind, I still have another Oklahoma tag in my pocket, and I have a Kansas tag in my pocket, and it's late October. This is hard to do, right?
right.
So when we're there, we get a front, and down in the river bottom, I have like a 2-acre food plot full of radishes and turnips, big old scrape, camera on it. While we're in Branson, that deer, the kicker deer, showed up, and in daylight, like 45 minutes before dark, and of course I'm in Branson doing something. I'm like, oh my goodness, I can't believe it. So like that evening he was there, that morning he was there, like 3 days in a row while we were there, he was daylight. So I'm like, as soon as I get back, we get back on Sunday, Monday, perfect north wind, still cold. I go, and like I said, there's very few trees. So you have the river bottom, which it's a north wind blowing from the cover out to the wheat field where all these deer are going. And then you have like this sand hills. There's two trees on this 300 or 400 yard stretch of sand hills. One's like a big cedar tree and one's some elm tree or something that's pretty good size. So I'm trying to decide what tree I'm going to get in. The wind is like west. So in hindsight, I should have known, but I decided to go where I think I'm going to be as close to his where he's bedding and how. So the deer, especially the bucks, in early November, they're parallel the river because all the does go from the river straight out to the ag, and the bucks parallel, scent checking everything.
Yeah.
So I think he's going to parallel. He's going to hit my food plot and then come out on his way to the wheat field, which would put him pretty close to my tree if I sat in the cedar tree. But the wind was straight out of the west, which is paralleling the river. Well, he came out way downwind of. He didn't go to my food plot. He just came straight out of the river bottom, like 300 yards downwind of me, and just starts working his way right up to that other tree that I would have been in if I had decided to go there. And so I'm of course, as soon as I see him, I'm glassing him, and you could just see him get to that point where he catches my wind, and then it just ears forward, looking straight at me. You can't see me, but he can smell me, obviously. And then he just turns around and just walks right back to the river. And man, I was sick. I was like, "There's no way that deer's gonna." He's been there like 3 days. There's no way he's gonna stay there. Like he's going back to wherever he spent the last 2 months. So I had a camera down, in the thick stuff on a scrape. It wasn't a cell cam, just a regular cam. And if I get a south wind, I can walk down the river. If the river's low enough, I can walk down the river and come up on the downwind side of all that bedding, which is close to where I have this scrape. So I did that one day and didn't see him. And after he smelled me, he wasn't on my cell cam that night or the next day. That next evening, I hunted there. Nothing. But after that evening sit, I pulled that card, and sure enough, like 3 or 4 days in a row, he was on that scrape, like in the middle of the day. So I knew he had to have been bedding close to that setup where I was. So so the next day, I decided I'm not going to hunt in the morning. I took my daughter, who was 3 at the time, hunting. I had permission on this place. I have a Kelty like child carrier pack. Put her in the pack, and we shot a doe. It was a blast. But that morning, he showed up in my food plot 30 minutes after light. So at that point, I'm like, he's gonna make a mistake around the food plot. I just have to keep hunting there. So the next evening, I went out. No, it was that evening. That evening, I went out, and it was like 15-mile-an-hour wind, pretty warm. Like, there's no way, but I have to sit here. And got up in this cottonwood tree, and sure enough, he did exactly what I thought. Parallel the river, come to the downwind side of my food plot where he can see. And when he did that, he was 25 yards from me. Came out to the end of the food plot, and then looked. He's just sitting there just looking at everything. Away from me. He thinks he's downwind of everything, but I'm just downwind of him. And,
right.
He was like 28 yards, and heart shot him.
Oh man, dude, that's crazy. So how much do you think? And this is just a general question. Like we can do it. I'll ask it specific to this hunt, but then I want you to think about it also, just like generally how you hunt. How much do you rely on a visual of a deer that you're hunting, or being able to watch them do something at least one time before you feel real good about being able to kill them?
On this deer, I relied on it because number one, I was relying on the historical data part of it, and which failed because the beans weren't there. He went somewhere else. He came back, luckily, in that pre-rut, and so when he comes back, and then I have the most of the time, I need to see that deer one time. If I know if I see that deer one time or get one picture of him, it's good enough for me to hunt. And I'll end up usually, because it's so open, I'll end up seeing that deer sometimes multiple times from a tree before I actually get a shot at him, where I can sit back, I can watch the river bottom or watch whatever, see what they do, then I can move closer and closer and closer. Now but at certain times of the year, like the rut, then it's you might be sitting there and have a chance at a deer you don't even know existed.
Right. Yeah, I was just curious because I know hunting plains has changed a lot of my perspective on how much I want a visual. I used to not rely on a visual at all, really. In PA, a lot of places to hunt, super thick. Some of the areas mountainous and stuff like that, to where you're probably not going to see the deer like you're trying to kill, like visually, potentially, right? Like until you do kill it, or until you see it close enough within bow range or whatever. Yeah. But hunting the plain states, like the biggest thing that I learned was just, if I can see that deer do something one time, like just watch him live one time do something, man, I feel way better about knowing what that deer's doing. You know what I mean? And it's almost like whenever you got that visual of that deer when he winded you, like even though he winded you, man, you saw how he was playing the game differently than what you thought. And it was like, that was almost like the nail in the coffin for him. It was just a matter of time then at that point.
It was, yeah. Right, because you understand how that deer's thinking. Okay, you know what? The 3 and 4-year-old bucks that I saw that evening, they came out just like I thought. They came out right down the food plot. They went right by me on their way out, right? And I expected him to do the same thing, but he's smarter than that. He has a different mentality. As soon as you realize he's going to go the extra 100, 200 yards to get downwind of everything, when the wind is now out of the south instead of out of the west, he's going to do the same thing. I have to be in a position to capitalize on that. Now, that's going to be generally the only buck that comes within bow range, but that's the buck I'm trying to kill.
Right. Man, you mentioned the cold front too, and it was a little windier and warmer than you would like. And you mentioned cold front, that there was a front coming through when you were in Branson and stuff like that. And I'm just, people have different kind of opinions, and I've had one over time, and it's slowly over time has changed where, I still like a cold front, don't get me wrong, but I think what I had mentioned to my buddy was like, I don't know that I'm as in love with them as I used to be, because I've just had too many good hunts. Yeah. And it was actually hunting plain states, which has changed my mind on this somewhat, where I've just had way too many good encounters and good visuals and killed on days that were what you would think to be bad weather days, to where, I've hunted, let's say like Kansas, for example, where it's like, I've hunted days where it was in the negatives, in the teens, and I've hunted days that were like, in the 75, 80 degree range. Right. And the better days were actually the days that were in the 70s than in the teens. Like, I've always said, like the sweet spot is like a little warmer than historical, than seasonal average, and a little colder than seasonal average is like the sweet spot. Like to me, I was like, and any colder than that, I almost felt like it started to shut down deer movement to a degree. And any warmer than that, it almost felt like it started to shut down deer movement as well.
Yeah. So there's two things that pop into mind when you say that. Cold weather, extreme cold weather shuts down deer movement. There's no doubt about that. But if you can get tight to that deer, they're way more killable, because they're thinking about surviving their food or whatever it is. They're not thinking about some weirdo in a tree.
Right.
And they're way more, or even on the ground. They're way more killable, but their movement bubble is way tighter. Mm-hmm. The other thing is, so people say, or I'll say, yeah, I love to hunt cold fronts, right? There's like this tiny window on the front end of a cold front where the high pressure is going to get deer on the feet, right? Then you have the cold front, deer aren't going to move, whether that brings rain or snow or whatever, or extreme cold. They're going to hold a lot tighter. Now then you have this column on the back end of that front where the weather's going to start heating up. They're going to feel stressed. Now they have to go find food or whatever it is, or maybe they just were hunkered under in a cedar thicket. Now they're going to go freshen up scrapes or whatever it is. So the back end of that weather, now the weather's warming up, it's more consistent, and you get more consistent movement because their bubble's getting bigger. That's how I look at it.
That makes sense, because like a lot of times I think people misunderstand like how to time the front, right? Like, because I'll hear, whether it's Heath Cisco or whatever the case is, like that dude loves him. Like I think the deer he killed this year was on the back of a front. It was like a rainstorm moved in, the temperature dropped, got gnarly, the weather came through, storm was really bad, and then I think he killed that deer within like 2 hours of the storm going through, like on the back side of it. And that's a lot of and that's right. I think what people like miss time. It's like, oh man, I got to be out whenever it's the coldest. It's like, no, it's like you probably want to be out like whenever the transition happens, because you usually will get a wind switch at the same time, and it usually, will screw the deer's not sense of direction up, but they're in a spot based on the wind that was as the front was coming in, and if that wind switches as the front's going out, now they're somewhat at a disadvantage, especially if you know where they're trying to come from or go to.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Right.
Nice, man. So now I want to transition, dude, to your Kansas hunt. And I was stoked to see that, like, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but this was like your first like out of state public land hunt, right? That you did.
Yeah. Correct.
For whitetail, right?
Yep.
And so I was stoked whenever I saw your post that you got the job done. So first I want to ask just, like what was it that made you want to do this, go on a public land hunt to a different state? What was the drive for that?
So there's multiple things that make me want to go do that. Number one that stands out is that it's a challenge. It's hard. I like challenging myself with the deer. So the private land I hunt in Oklahoma, it's high deer density. It's a really good buck to doe ratio. So my challenge is I pick out one deer, and this is the deer that I go after, right? I'm not just shooting the first mature deer that goes by. So that's my challenge here. And I've done that for multiple years now. And I've always wanted to hunt Kansas, right? Who doesn't want to hunt Kansas? I've always heard about it. I've always wanted to hunt it. So that's one draw. I want to hunt Kansas. Number two, I really want to challenge myself, like, as a hunter, right? Because I question myself, like, you see these guys, like you guys, that hunt hard places to hunt. Can my knowledge translate to that scenario? Mm-hmm. So I want to challenge myself in that aspect. And then, Cameron Durr, he was like, you kill lots of big bucks, but you haven't killed any out of state. Like, so that kind of was like some motivation too. Like, hey, okay, I got to see if I can do it. Right.
Right. Oh, Cameron, my buddy. Yeah. That's such a good dude, man. Like he's, yeah, I love spending time with him. He's just such a sponge, when it comes to hunting. Yeah. He's like one of the few guys that that I know that just he picks stuff up so quickly and he applies it so quickly. And he was actually in Kansas the same time I was this year. We were in different areas, but as soon as I killed my deer, like I texted him and he was like, dude, I'm on my way. He was like an hour away. And the guy's like, I'm leaving the woods right now. I'm jumping in my truck. I'll be there in an hour, and true to his word, like he and a couple buddies, showed up, but it's like I like the fact that he was talking a little smack, so that's good. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. So you pick Kansas, right? I don't want to know what unit, but just give me a sense of like the habitat, because like Oklahoma, like you described to me to Oklahoma how diverse it is. Like Kansas is also a really diverse state depending on what part of the state you're in. So just give me a sense of like what you were going into as far as like the habitat setup and stuff like that.
Yeah. So like once again, kind of on that transition zone where you have like there's one public piece that's pretty decent size, and it's just pretty much wide open. Mm-hmm. And there's some sand hills, there's plum thickets, a few patches of timbers, some tree rows, like windbreak type of stuff. And then there's lots of ag around it. Then there's a good sprinkling of wheat haw in there that's anywhere from just nothing, no trees at all, mm-hmm. just CRP, some with some trees, some with just ag. It was a wide variety, but mainly open terrain.
Mm-hmm. So when you're headed there, what was kind of like your game plan? Were you going like, this is probably going to be a hunt where it's going to be like 95% on the ground, or were you like, I'm going to try to find a tree to get into somewhere. I'm going to hunt, creek bottoms that run a mile long and maybe go through a couple property, or run 3, 4, 5 miles that run through a couple sections, you know what I mean? To where like the deer are going to travel those, and if I put my time in, I'll see a buck, what was kind of like your strategy or your thinking, like whenever you're getting ready to go on that hunt?
So earlier on when we were talking, I was talking about when I was first bow hunting. I had no problem just making sets, watching, see what I could do, and just doing it over and over and over. So that was kind of my game plan. Like so I live 35 miles from the Kansas border, but and I still have to drive 2 hours, or more to get to where I was wanting to hunt. So every spare day that I could, I would drive up there, and if I had a couple hours, I'd drive to the closest public, and I would just set on it with sometimes in my truck and just glass and see what I could see. So I started doing that in August. I was making trips up there, into September, and there, can't remember what the date was. Was it their opener? Was it the 11th this year? I think maybe September 11th.
That sounds about right.
So so that was my strategy, was like go and walk. I was walking into pieces that I could. Some of the weed haul wasn't open, but I was glassing it from the road. And some of the bigger chunks, I was walking, like I was going in, walking, and just seeing what I could see, because I'd never been on these pieces, and I really wanted to get boots on the ground in these places and see what it was. So doing that, I ended up finding a very big deer on a big piece of public, and 2 weeks before season open, I found this deer, and he was the most killable deer I've ever seen, especially on public.
Right.
And so I sat on that deer for 2 weeks. Like every weekend, I was up there watching that deer, and he was doing the exact same thing. He was bedding in this little island of trees. He had a scrape on one side of it. He would work this scrape, and he was going back and forth between this, a pivot that had food on it. And so I was like, this is the perfect scenario. I'm sure I can get a shot at this deer. So the season opened on Monday. On Sunday, I watched that deer till almost dark as he went out to the ag. I walked a mile out to my truck, got in my truck, and I'm down this dead-end road, okay? It's not even maintained road. It's like this driving through grass, basically, to the parking area where I could walk in from there. So I get in my truck, and I'm just leaving, and I see headlights coming down the road. So when I get up there close to them, I see Iowa tags. And they pulled over and rolled their window down. So I pulled up beside them, and it was the hunting public guys.
Oh, nice.
And they had muzzleloader tags, which opened the same day. They went in there, and I couldn't hunt Monday because I had to work, but I was coming back later that week. They went in there Monday, and they shot that deer. So I had all my eggs in that basket. So when he sent me a picture, he's like, hey, we shot this deer. He was super nice about it. But that was my whole strategy. Now, bam, out the window. I have to start back from square one.
Dude, so that deer gets killed, and you're back to square one, and this is like right at the opener, right? Like middle of September, right?
Yeah, opening day. Yep.
Right. So when are you still making trips up like pretty often, because your season's open now, and like we already know now that you killed one in early October, and then obviously you had that deer in November, and so are you still making trips up there, kind of glassing, putting boots on the ground, or are you more so just going, what, I'm going to make a trip, later in the year, and I'm just going to kind of push all in for that and just figure it out on the fly? Like, what's your approach now?
So I made several trips up there, in the latter part of September before our season opened. And I wasn't seeing anything. I was hunting a big piece of public, walking way in there and just not seeing. This public was a different piece than that other one. It's a little more wooded, and they do some food plot work in there and stuff. But man, I wasn't seeing anything. Very few deer. See a few does. Saw a couple like 1-year-old bucks, but just was not seeing anything. And then our season opened. I kind of focused here. That deer showed up. The second deer I shot showed up, so I was kind of focused on that. Then my wife likes to hunt, so I spent some time in November, pretty much all of November. I made it up there a couple times, but not very much. But like, I think it was November 18th or something. At that point, I was like, okay, now it's time to focus on Kansas, which I missed most of the rut. And so I decided that I'd really invested in that public piece that has more trees on it, just because I thought more cover. I found some really good sign in there. But I decided that I would take a day and go just look at every weehaw piece that I could get to, and just, if I thought it looked good, walk into it, see what it looked like. So I did that one weekend toward the end of November, and I found a lot more pieces that looked better to me. So I made that trip, and I have an old Land Cruiser, and I put the seats down in the back, and I would just sleep in that thing. Man, it got cold, but I would just pull into a parking lot, or
Right.
just sleep in there, hunt. I mean, it was fun. It was the experience that I've always thought hunting out of state would be. And so I was just looking at all these places. Well, make sure I'm saying this right. The first weekend in December, if I remember right, is the opener of gun season in Kansas, which was, I think it was a Friday, is their gun opener. So I went up there Friday, and I spent all day Friday, all day Saturday up there, and looking at some of this weehaul. Now, the big chunks of public would have like 10, 15 trucks, parked throughout it.
Yep.
But those weehaul places were just dead. I saw some bird hunters a couple times, but no deer hunters. So that gave me a lot of hope. So I found this one piece. I got up in a tree there, and man, there was deer everywhere. I felt like I was hunting a private piece of land. There was just deer everywhere. And I didn't see any mature bucks, but I saw a lot of 2-3-year-old bucks past a 10 point that I should have shot. I'm glad I didn't, but at the time I was kind of regretting it. By a 3-year-old. And so I kept going back to that spot, hunting there, and some weehaw around there. Then the end of the last weekend of Kansas gun season, which in Kansas, if you're bow hunting during the gun season, you have to wear orange vest, orange hat, which I hate doing when I'm hunting. But so the last weekend I went up there Sunday afternoon, which that was the last day of season, and I hunted Sunday afternoon. And I was getting into the deer, but just nothing mature. And now, the deer, they're really transitioning to that late season cover. And you know how that CRP stuff is up there. It's some of it. If it hasn't been grazed or cut in a while or anything, it's super tall. So I would get up in a tree where I would think I could see out in there. I couldn't see anything. But, around the edges, I would see deer. Maybe it was onto the private property next to it. They'd be going out into the ag or whatever. So that was helping me narrow some stuff down. And it was giving me hope because I was seeing deer, just not what I wanted to shoot. So I hunted all day Sunday, all day Monday up there. And I would hunt in the mornings, then I would go look at, different weehaw that I hadn't been to, and just see if it had potential. Man, there are some beautiful places up there that I wish I'd have known about sooner, so that's one thing that I would do different, is spend more time just walking pieces, glassing pieces, looking at pieces. I would look at a piece on the map, and it would look horrible. I would go to it, I'm like, holy cow, this is amazing. Or it would look there's one piece that was like 300 acres. It looked amazing. I went to it, and the cows, it was grazed down. The grass was this tall. There wasn't a deer on that whole place.
Oh, yeah. Chad and I ran into that so many times that first year we were out there that, we had all these spots picked on a map before we went out, and he turkey hunted it, so he kind of qualified some of them. And then we would get out there and, and drive them and glass them, and then we would get to them, and we were just like, man, this is just garbage. Like, you know what I mean? Like, and it was like the spot that we had like a bunch of our hopes pinned on. And to your point, like some of the places we were just like, we didn't even mark. We were like, oh, this looks like garbage on the map. And we were like, well, let's just drive by it. And we would get there and be like, oh man, this is great. And what we started doing, the way Chad killed that deer that he killed was, we were just first looking for where we were finding congregation of deer, like in general, like numbers of deer. Because that year, I guess they had some EHD, like that year that we kind of found out about, or the year prior. And so killed a lot of their bigger, older bucks. And so at that point, we were just like, we just need to be around deer. The other thing we kind of figured out was finding like weehaw that's isolated, where it's like one piece of weehaw that maybe has a little bit of cover, some CRP, and maybe there's like a small stream that runs through it or something like that to give it like some stem count or whatever. And that everything around it that is crop is pulled out. And so it's a solo piece of weehaw that people probably aren't going to go to because it's not a bigger chunk, or it's not a chunk that's connected to 6 other ones where you could go and spend a day kind of working it, you know? And so we would just try to find those isolated ones that were surrounded by crop that had been pulled out, or at least crop pulled out on most of the sides, or if not all the crops were out, at least like the next sections around it were pulled out, like at least the mile sections around it were all pulled out. That way place was really like the only cover for deer to go to or whatever.
Yeah.
And so we started kind of finding those, and that was whenever we started finding the deer. That exact type of spot is how Chad found the spot that he ended up killing his deer in that year.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Heck yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, like to your point, going around and seeing deer, whether it's half a mile away or whatever, looking back now at it, those were the places that I definitely should have been concentrating my time on, for sure.
Yeah. So how did you end up, like, so take me through like the final, like you found a spot obviously, and like, you know, and ended up killing a good deer. So how did that all kind of finally manifest?
So, so I was way up north in my unit, way as far north as I could go doing all this, which is a couple hour drive. So Monday, I hunted, didn't see any shooters. Monday night, I drove back home. Tuesday, I got up, and I was working, doing cattle stuff, and then I get a text from a guy so there's a weehaw place that I would drive by, and I hunted probably like 6 times and saw some deer on it. That's a lot further south. It's a lot closer to, of a drive for me. But there's it's kind of rolling sand hills. Half of it's like really thick CRP. The other half is CRP. It's not quite as thick, but it's still CRP, hard to hunt. And there's like 10 cottonwood trees that are like 4 foot across. You can't get up in them on the whole place, right? So it's hard to hunt. But I hunted it several times and saw lots of deer. Well, Tuesday, which was December 12th, a guy that I know that has a lease a couple miles from this weehaw piece texted me and said, "Hey, I just saw a good buck on that weehaw piece." And so I was like, "Great." I thought he was going to go after him, right? And I texted him. I was like, a little bit later, whatever and he's like, "No, I'm going to hunt my lease. I don't think I can get on that deer. I just thought I'd let you know." So, I didn't really think anything of it. A little bit later, I'm talking to my wife on the phone, and I tell her, and she's like, "Man, you should at least go see, maybe you can see him or whatever. There's a deer in there." Like, okay, well, I had my bow, most of my stuff in my pickup, so I just left. I went up there, drove the hour, whatever it is, to get up there. And so the guy, there's a road, there's an east-west road that this guy was driving on. And he was looking south into the weehaw, and there's like 200 yards off the road, there's some sand hills that are, the grass, because it's real sandy, the grass isn't as tall, and he could see that deer. He thought maybe it was laying down or something there. So I went to that spot, and I just, was driving along real slow, glassing, couldn't see anything, and it's really windy. Couldn't see anything, straight wind out of the east, like 15, 20 miles an hour. So I drove to the west end of this property where I had parked before and accessed it, and I'm sitting there thinking, the odds of me getting on a deer in this place are next to none. But west of this property, you have a cut soybean field, like a 20 acres cut soybean field. And then right south of that, you have a piece of property that looks like it's highly managed for whitetails. There's lots of strip, like windbreaks in it. There's blinds, there's feeders and food plots. So it made sense to me that the deer would go that direction. So I'm on the west end of the property. The wind's from the east, and I walk out to the sand hills, which is 200-300 yards off the road, and I just start slowly walking down the sand hills on the north side. My thinking was, if he was bedded on that side close to me, he would just stand up. It was so windy, I might be able to get close enough that I could get a shot, whatever. So I go to where the guy sent me the pin that he last saw him, and no deer. So I go over the sandhill, and you know how if there's sandhills where you hunt up there in Kansas, but they're not these ones aren't real big. They're just kind of from the flat to the top is maybe like 15 feet. It's not real high. They're just kind of gradual hills.
Mm-hmm.
So I go up the side of the sandhill, and the grass is a lot thinner on them. And I go up the sandhill, and I'm peeking over every once in a while. Well, when I get to that pin, I peek over, and there's another like sandhill that kind of goes around to the south, and right here on the bottom side of that one is maybe like a 10-yard circle sand plum thicket. So I'm thinking that it would make sense that he would adjust his bed to there because it's on this side of the hill where the wind's kind of at his back. He could look west downwind, and he could see. So I'm just barely peeking over, and I just glass, and I can't see anything in that thicket. So I decided to just kind of get on the top of that sandhill on the ground, and I can see a ways. So if I do see him, I figured because it was late, no, it was early afternoon when that guy saw the deer, so he probably just changed beds. He's probably really close to this area. And if I see him stand up, maybe I can move, off one side of the sandhill to the other, or maybe he'll just work that sandhill line out to the ag or, wherever. Right. That's what I was gambling on. So I sat there, arranged some stuff, and I'm just sitting there it probably took me an hour to get to that point, and then I bet I sat there for probably 2 hours. Probably 20 minutes before dark, my wife texts me. She's like, how's it going or something? So I pull my phone out of my pocket, and I'm texting her, but I'm always scanning. So I'm trying to text, but I'm like looking, looking, and I see antlers moving in that thicket. And I put my phone down, and I don't know how I never saw the buck, but he had moved his antlers just right to where at that point where I could just see his antlers, and it's 45 yards to that thicket. And so I immediately grab my bow and clip on, and he moves his antlers a few times, and then he just stands right up and does the whole neck stretch. And dude, as soon as I could see that he was starting to stand up, I pulled back and anchored and released. Like, I probably should have taken more time, but I maybe rushed it a little bit. But I hit him perfect, right where I was aiming. He was quartered to me just a little bit more than I thought, and he ran probably 200 yards out past this next flat up into some other sand hills, and he was kind of on the side of a sand hill and just stopped. And he would get all wobbly, but then he would lay down, and it was like this roller coaster. It's getting dark. And he would lay down, but then he would stand back up, and where I hit him, I was like, that's a double lung deer. Like, he should be dead, but he's not. So it was a whole ordeal, So I waited a while and then went back in there with a light, and he was done. But what I had done is he was quartered to me a little more than I thought, and I kind of touched his onside shoulder just barely. And I think it deflected the arrow a little bit. So it got the onside lung, right through the onside lung, but then it went through the liver and out mid-body.
Right.
So, it was just watching that arrow. 45 yards is enough time, to see the arc and just bam. It was beautiful. After so much work into that, like I at that point Monday night, I was like, I'm not gonna fill this tag. I'm coming to this grip with it. That it's just what it is. I went up there. I got my butt kicked. I experienced the public lane thing. I ran into hunters. I got cussed out. I got the whole thing, right? And that's how it's gonna be. But then when that Tuesday evening come, it was just beautiful.
That's awesome,
I'm more
man.
proud of that deer than probably any deer I've shot.
Heck yeah, man. And as you should be, man. That's not an easy thing to do, especially it's like all the reasons that you kind of said earlier of why you wanted to do it are all the reasons why I, like, chasing deer on public land and traveling to go do it. It's you never know what you're going to run into. You're battling the deer as much as you're battling other people, especially the time of year that you were out there, man. Like, out there, I usually try to get everything taken care of by the time pheasant hunters kind of hit, right? Because it just becomes chaos after that.
Yeah.
Like, pheasant hunters are all blowing out every piece of CRP. Then you have gun season come in, and it's just like, a complete gong show at that point. It's like Chad and I, the first year, so I usually hunt I'll go out usually the second and third week. So the first week is usually I have completely, not to myself, but it's just bow hunting, right? There's no bird hunting. There's a youth pheasant season usually that first weekend when I'm there. And I usually have a whole week, or almost 7 days of no other hunters other than bow hunters that I have to deal with. And then that following weekend, pheasant season comes in. That first year, Chad and I just started following pheasant hunters and would park in glass and watch them walk through CRP fields, just see what they kick up, see if they bust a good buck out, and if he was bedded there, if he had a doe or whatever the case was. And that was our strategy, was just follow them and watch them kick deer up. But yeah, it's
would you see those deer come back into those CRP places?
We never saw them kick any deer out. That was just our flyer was we're they're going to blow these places out. We got in real early that first morning of that opening morning of pheasant, and we had, I had a couple small bucks. I don't know what he had. I had a couple small bucks and a couple deer walk within 5 yards of me. I was on the edge of this Milo field and this CRP field where they kind of met, and I was watching this drainage. And we had been glassing from this big, it was a big fuel tower. We were glassing that area 2 days prior. And so we knew there were some deer in there. And we actually put a stalk on a buck in this area that bedded, and we ended up screwing up the stalk. But so I was sitting in there while he was somewhere glassing. And while I was sitting there, I had 5 deer walk within 5 yards of me, just hanging out, walk right past me, got behind me in the Milo. And then whenever then a couple pheasant hunters came through with a dog, and I waved them down. I flashed I had an orange thing with me. I just flashed at them so they knew where I was at once, because I could see and hear them, so I knew they were coming. So before they got too close, I just flashed it at them so they knew I was in there. And then when they came up, were you deer hunting here? And I was like, yeah. And I was look, I was just hunting here in the morning. I was you guys want to go head through? I was if you don't mind, I'm just going to follow you for the next couple hours and watch you guys drive out these CRP fields to see. They're no, that's fine. Yeah. And I was all right, cool. So they were cool dudes, but I mean, it seemed like a sound strategy. I would use it again if the same thing happened. We just didn't see any deer, and we ended up going, to a different area, and made a different plan at that point. Yeah. But so did you get the bug now, or do you want to go back? Or what's the deal?
Oh yeah, I'm definitely going back. So we have a farm. We have a good-sized farm in Kansas. In that unit I was hunting, that I elected to not hunt because I wanted to do the public thing. So I can get landowner tags there every year. So probably what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get a landowner tag next year, and then every other year draw, because it took me 2 years to draw the tag. So if I don't draw another tag this year, I'll just get the landowner tag, and then the year after I'll
nice
do the public thing again.
Yeah.
But I have several Iowa points. I think I'm going to go to Iowa next year.
Okay.
And do the public thing, up north, not down south.
Yeah. Yeah. I can share some info with you on Iowa. I should draw Iowa not this year, but probably next if I want to go. But I might hold off a couple years, because I think I'm going to wait till my daughter's she's got 2 more years of high school left, so I'll probably wait till my daughter leaves for college, and then I'll get my Iowa tag, because I'm just going to go. I'm going to move. Yeah. I work remotely, so I'm just going to move there beginning of October and live there, and work from there during the whole season pretty much. Is my plan.
Oh heck yeah, that's awesome.
So I was I'm just going to wait till I can do that. That way I can just hunt the whole fall, and just basically live there. And my wife doesn't care about it. I just don't want to miss the time with my daughter being home and stuff. But
right, yeah.
But yeah, man, so the funny thing is Kansas is one of those places where if you have land to hunt, private lease or a farm or whatever the case is, it can be really good. But I actually think the beauty of Kansas is the ability to see, drive, and hunt the public in the weehaw, because you're not beholden to one spot. You can go and hunt wherever you find the deer that makes you the most excited. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It was definitely a lot harder than I thought it was going to be.
Mm-hmm.
You have this image in your head of what you think it's going to be, and it was not that.
Yeah.
Which I'm grateful for. I learned so much doing that, and obviously was blessed with a really nice buck on public land or whatever. But yeah, it's tough, and it's not for everybody. I think the thing that I mean I don't know, some people might talk about it or not, but that is maybe underestimated is the mental game
Mm.
that you have to be in to just do it over and over and over and over, and not see deer, not see a mature buck. Like, I'm used to going on really good private land that I highly manage, and I can watch so many deer, right? So then when you go to a place like that where you see bird hunters, you see other hunters, and not see any deer, that's a whole mental thing where the family and the kids are back at home. You're thinking about things, and I'm crazy. I should be doing this. I should be doing that. What am I doing out here? But just being able to stick to it, and overcome that mental wall, and then, because ultimately, when I'm sitting out there in a tree, or I'm walking through a new piece, or I'm looking at this scrape or whatever, I'm doing what I love to do. Why is that a mental game? But it is. It's a mental battle that we play, especially after you get kicked in the pants a few times.
Yeah.
But then after that, after you get over that hump and you're successful, makes it that much sweeter.
Yeah. It doesn't. There's nothing feels like it.
Yeah.
It took me. I was out there for 2 different seasons. A total of 3 weeks of hunting out there between 2 seasons, and until this year that I finally filled that tag. And it was at full draw on deer. It was having deer within 20 yards of me that I couldn't get killed. I had so many encounters where the deer should have been dead. Either I messed it up, and I was like adamant about, I'm only doing it from the ground. I was like, I'm not getting into a tree. I'm only doing it from the ground. That's the only way I'm going to do it. And that was just like how I wanted to do it. I was like, I want to do it in a ghillie jacket on the ground, and and so I probably missed some opportunities I would have had otherwise if I would have been willing to change how I was doing it. But it was just that's what I wanted to do. And so you're right, man. It's like, it can be a mental grind, because I love doing it, but you get into I remember the first trip I was out there for 2 weeks, and I remember like day 10 or 11, I'm like, I love this, but I hate this right now. You know what I mean? I'm like, I just want something to go right. You know what I mean? It's like everything it feels like I'm doing, it's like I'm like a step behind and I can't get in front, but, and then when it all comes together, man, it's like the sweetest thing ever, and then you're like, man, I can't wait to do it again. I would do all the bad stuff all over again for that 5 minutes of euphoria. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, exactly. But that learning curve gets smaller and smaller and smaller.
There you go. That's it.
Hopefully.
You know what I mean? And that was the biggest thing for me of being out there like this year, and just hunting open country in general, was, at least for me, realizing how important the visual was for me. You know what I mean? Like, that was, because I never really relied much on a visual before, and now it's like, I almost want a visual even whenever I'm hunting back home now. Like, if I can see a deer do something one time, I feel like I can kill it,
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, and here on my farms in Oklahoma, I don't rely as much on that. But when I was hunting Kansas, that's like all I relied on. Like, if I sat in a tree and didn't see a deer, it's to the next.
You felt like you didn't do anything, or you didn't know anything. You know what I mean? At that point, yeah. It's like, if you didn't see it, it's like you felt like it was like you had no clue. You were out of the game, and you could be in the game. But as soon as you get that one visual and you watch that deer do one thing one time, you're like, oh, game on. Like, I know what he's going to do now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right. And like here, I rely on cameras. I run camera. I mean, not a lot, but I run a few cameras, 5 or 6 cameras. But this is the first year Kansas has the trail cam ban. It's the first year I hunted it. Yeah. So I mean, I was going into that thinking, I'm gonna put trail cameras out. I'm gonna watch these, but couldn't do that. So it's just what your visual is, what you get. And also, the other thing was the amount of people that I ran into that house bait sites and cameras on public land is amazing.
Yeah.
Couldn't believe it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the Wild West out there in some places, man, for sure. I've talked to, Jared and the guys from Whitetail Adrenaline quite a bit, like before I went out there, and I picked up a lot of stuff from him, and he always talked about the visual, and I never really understood it much until I started going out there. And then after I killed that deer and I I text Jared, and then like he ended up calling me, a couple of days after that, and we were talking about it, and I was like, dude, I totally get it now. Visual, like, gotta have it. You know what I mean? It's like, otherwise I was like, I never felt more in the game, until I saw that deer do one thing one time. And once I did that, I was like, he was dead. I was like, that was just all there was to it, but, well, cool, man. I've kept you on here just about an hour and a half, dude. I don't want to be sensitive to your time, let you get some family time in this evening. But before I let you get out of here, let people know where they can follow along with you, where they can follow you on Instagram or social media or anything that you have going on that you want to make people hip to.
So Instagram, I post on there semi-regularly. Tyrell Roy on Instagram. That's about the only place you can find me on social media. So.
Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate you coming on, buddy. I hope you have a good rest of the holiday season and a happy new year and all that good stuff. And I look forward to seeing what you got going on. And dude, you have an open invite anytime you want to come on here, buddy, to talk deer hunting. The door's open for you, and I'll leave the tiki light on for you.
Awesome. Sounds good. Thanks for having me on.
All right, folks, that is a wrap for today's show. I'd like to thank all of you for listening, and if you haven't yet, please head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast. And while you're at it, head over to YouTube and give us a sub there as well. I'd be super appreciative if you do those couple things for me. And before I shut this thing down, we need to give a big shout out to our partners who continue to help us make this podcast possible. Tethered, Exodus Outdoor Gear, and Genesee Beer. And until next time, we'll see y'all.